So you've got $75 burning a hole in your pocket, you really want to play GTA 5, but then you see two really good beers at your local tap house, and you think, maybe I'll just bring a couple growlers home instead. Well, what if I told you, well, you can't do both, but you could probably choose one. Welcome back to Craft Computing. As always, I'm Jeff. So today we're taking a look at the MSI GT1030 Aero ITX card. A little bit of a mouthful for such a small card. There's always one big question that comes with this series of graphics card. Can it actually play games? There's a population of people who wonder why AMD and nVidia keep making cards in this class, that being the $50 to $75 mark. They usually get completely outclassed by cards in the $100 to $120 like the RX 560 and the GTX 1050. That being said, there is something kind of compelling about this card. It only draws 30 watts, it still has 2 GB of GDDR5, this is an overclockable card through MSI Afterburner, and through my testing, it actually does hold up well enough in a lot of AAA titles. Let's take a look at some specs first. This is a Pascal-based GPU with a 1518 MHz base clock, 2 GB of GDDR5 clocked at 3000 MHz. It does have an HDMI 2.0 port, which does support 4K, and a single-link DVI, which only goes up to 1080p. The cool thing about this card is it does support overclocking through MSI Afterburner. I managed a 205 MHz bump to the core, as well as a 150 MHz bump to the memory. That actually gave me a 2113 MHz core clock after GPU Boost 3.0 kicked in. Pretty respectable for such a little card. My test bench today is my average Steam user's PC. It's equivalent to an i5 2500 quad core, no hyperthreading, 8 GB of DDR3, and a 2 TB Western Digital Black spinning disk. Now before we get to the benchmarks, some of you I know are waiting for a follow-up to that video. I know I promised an upgrade path to that. This is not that video. I do not recommend you swap out a GTX 660 or 760 or equivalent card for a GT 1030. Those are not equivalent cards. This is probably half the performance of one of those cards. That being said, this was simply the best platform for this test. I already mentioned GTA 5, so let's just jump straight into that. I used a mix of low and medium settings all around in this game, with high quality textures and draw distance set to maximum. I wanted a good mix of frame rate and graphical fidelity while not pushing this card beyond its limit. With those settings, I actually managed to hit 73 frames per second on average, with a 1% low of just 56. Perfectly playable, and actually a very enjoyable experience at that. There was no stuttering to speak of, and the game was smooth as could be. Now, is this the best looking game and rendering of GTA 5 I've ever seen? No, by any means not. But that being said, I still managed 73 frames per second with a very playable and viewable experience. Fallout 4 was another game that I was pretty curious about. There's no metrics on what the low end of playability is because no one benchmarks this, mainly because this is a VSync title, which means it forces 60 frames per second on even the highest end rig. Like GTA 5, I started off with mostly low settings, and I wanted to keep draw distance a little bit higher, so I set that at 50%. To my surprise, I still managed 58 frames per second on average. Now my 1% low was at 29 frames per second, and my 0.1% was at 19. A little bit of stuttering going on, but overall a very smooth experience. And I can't attribute the stuttering 100% to the graphics card. I think some of that may have been the spinning disk struggling to load some world elements. I did try Doom with this card. You're not going to be playing Doom with this card. I averaged around 20 FPS with my lows down in the 4 FPS range. Swinging back the other direction, Project Cars actually really impressed me at medium settings. It averaged 86 FPS with 56 FPS for a 1% low. I also benchmarked Rocket League and CSGO. I did do those at high settings as I wanted to see something that would offer fairly good graphical fidelity while stressing this card as much as possible. Rocket League averaged 42 FPS with a 1% low of just 29. Very playable, although if you're going to play competitively, I would recommend lowering those settings a bit. Even going to 720p with high settings could yield very good results with this card. CSGO I managed 115 FPS at 1080p in high settings, although my lows were kind of shockingly low at 25 and 19 FPS for the 1% and 0.1% respectively. The stuttering was mainly attributed to passing the camera through a smoke bomb through the community-generated benchmark map. This is a commonly reported problem, and it really does stress this card to 100%. It's not an uncommon problem to have with lower-powered cards either. In actual online gaming, your results may vary. So now the question you're all going to ask me, should you go out and buy a GT 1030 for yourself? Probably not, especially if you're looking for a gaming card. As impressed as I am with the numbers that I got out of this card, it is still a very, very budget level card. It's $75, and it's going to be outclassed in every way, shape, and form by the GTX 1050 sitting there at just $120. If you're looking for a gaming card, save your money, get a GTX 1050. If you're looking for a cool and quiet home theater PC card, this is an excellent choice. It only draws 30 watts, it does support 4K output, and it's going to render anything you can possibly throw at it in that case. There is a caveat when it comes to gaming though. If you are on a very tight budget, let's say $200, you can get onto Newegg and you can get an off-lease Dell PC with an i5, 4 gigs of RAM, and a 250 gig drive with a Windows 10 license for about $140 shipped. Throw this card in there, you're looking at a $205 gaming PC that can play modern games. MSI even has a low-profile version of this card, if that's the only case options they have available at this time. This is a card that certainly stretches the limit of what nVidia has traditionally put into their low-budget cards, but it's still squarely a low-budget card. Yes, it can play some modern games, and actually fairly impressively at low settings. But that being said, again, it is still vastly outclassed by the GTX 1050. Thanks again for joining me, guys. Like the video if you like this one, subscribe if you want to see more. As I mentioned earlier, I am going to be doing an upgrade path to that average Steam user's PC, so stay tuned for that in the next couple of weeks. Drop me a line in the comments if you have more questions about this card, or you want to see something else in some future videos. I'm definitely open to suggestions, and I do enjoy talking to you guys when you're civil. Now, if you don't mind me, it was 101 degrees outside again in Oregon. I'm a little tired of it. I want to finish my beer. We'll catch you next time. Beer good. Yeah.